Hi, I'm Dr. Stan Steindl, and welcome to Compassion in a T-shirt. Today's episode is a very special one, as we explore the meeting point of psychology, creativity, and compassion in a project that brings a deeply important book to new life. Through voice, you'll meet three remarkable women who have come together to turn the compassionate mind approach to postnatal depression into an audiobook. A project grounded in care, intention, and the desire to reach mothers in one of life's most vulnerable times. First, I speak with Michelle Cree, consultant clinical psychologist and author of the original book. Michelle brings years of experience working with women in the perinatal period and a deep commitment to compassion-focused therapy as a healing approach. And we're joined by Ashleigh McLellan, the creative producer of the project and longtime admirer of Michelle's work, who first imagined the idea of turning the book into something new, something that could be heard and felt in those quiet, difficult, and sometimes lonely moments of early motherhood. And finally, we meet Samantha Norbury, the voice behind the audiobook. Sam brings with her a background in voice artistry, a grounded presence, and a sensitivity that helped bring Michelle's words to life in ways that are both soothing and strong. Together, they've created something much more than a recording. It's a compassionate companion. And today we unpack the story behind that companion, where it began, how it evolved, and what it means to each of them. The audiobook version of The Compassionate Mind Approach to Postnatal Depression is available now. And so I bring you Michelle Cree, Ashleigh McLellan, and Sam Norbury. Great. Well, Michelle Cree, Ashleigh McLellan, and Sam Norbury, welcome to Compassion in a T-shirt.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Wonderful to have you. I've interviewed three people at once before, so it's always exciting to see how the little dance happens. So we'll work that out as time goes on. But I thought I might start with you, Michelle, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, just in terms of when you first wrote the Compassionate Mind Approach to Postnatal Depression, what were you seeing among the women perhaps that you were working with and the mothers, and that made you feel like this book was really needed at the time?
Oh gosh. Um, well, there's so much. I guess there were two main things that have kind of carried this through. The first was my sense of how significant this time is. That it's so unique, it's so special, it's so discombobulating. It's hard to put into words, and I think that's part of the issue. Is the more that I did the work and the people I met and so on, the more I was aware of how much the body is so part of the process of carrying a baby, of delivering a baby, of breastfeeding a baby, feeding the baby, carrying a baby, that your body and your mind are totally entwined, and it literally turns you inside out having this baby.
Yeah.
And it was that kind of contrast of how unique and special and crazy and amazing and difficult and scary, and that you've got life and death right up against each other. The kind of the fear, almost an evolved fear, but a real fear of, could I die? Could this baby kill me while it's in me, whilst I'm delivering it? Could I kill this baby? It's like these really deep, hard, the kind of really mucky stuff is so there in this time. And I wanted to hold that in my work. I always felt like I wanted to hold the space for those things that were really hard to put into words, that people might feel. And I felt that there are so many parenting books out there, but not very many really capture the depth of this. And I felt again and again that you look at the books and you don't find yourself there. And when you don't, there is this sense of kind of disconnection and shame, really. So it was a place for people to come and find themselves and really hear about this struggle. So that was the first thing. And the second thing was my experience of working in the perinatal mental health service, and the women inevitably coming with struggles whilst also having a brand new being to look after. But what I saw over and over again was their self-criticism, that they blame themselves for this. And it was so tragic that I kind of feel angry, really, a real kind of passion that I just want to shout into the world, this is not their fault. This is not your fault. They were knowing the things that I know and are still learning about all of the different influences that women then take into themselves and believe that somehow they're to blame. So it was also this getting that out to as many women as possible, that this really is not your fault and that there is a way through this. So it was also providing a kind of a map, a roadmap, because really seeing that even if women could hear this, there was but now what? How do I get through? Is there a way through it? And yes, this amazing approach that Paul Gilbert has given us. That's really wanting to share this. So that was, those two things were the main drivers for the book.
Gosh, so inspiring, even just to hear you mention those
As you
couple
can
of
hear,
things.
it's so there in my body. It's just
Absolutely,
oh
absolutely, and
gosh.
the discombobulating is such a good word. There is a lot of empathy that's expressed in the book. I sort of can imagine a reader feeling understood in the way that you were trying to achieve, and this was actually one of the things that I was thinking coming to this conversation, actually, is that while I've been around the birth of children and kind of involved as a father, I obviously, that there's something about kind of, for me about, like what must that actually even possibly be like? It sort of brings up the limits sometimes of one's empathy in a way, I suppose, as a man sort of sort of trying to think about this area. Your book gave something of a glimpse, even for a male reader, I think, into some of that. And it struck me really that there just is such a whole range of feelings, a spectrum of
Yeah.
feelings that can come up, that are many of which you seem almost like at opposite ends of that spectrum, and yet there was this sense, as you just mentioned, that it kind of often self-criticism arises almost no matter what we're feeling. The
Yes.
self-criticism arises.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And I think it was because I had the privilege of working with so many different women with so many different issues that they came with. I think it was what astonished me was that self-criticism was so often there. And it was actually rare to find somebody who was suffering in this way, but they could bring compassion to their suffering. It was almost like, oh, so there was this real sense that these things come together for whatever reason, and perhaps in this population or this country, I don't really know, but certainly in my experience, it was the self-criticism that needed addressing. Because
There's such
when you're down, when you're struggling, it felt like there was this, kicking yourself when you're down.
Hmm.
So what would it be like to have this compassionate support and encouragement? Might that be different?
There's such an innocence, really, isn't there, in the discombobulation? I think anxious feelings, frustrated feelings,
Mm,
feelings of disconnection. They're all very
mm,
innocent parts of the experience, and yet
yes.
this self-criticism, I guess, as the book goes on to describe, it's sort of part of the design too, in a way, of the human brain and all of that.
Mm,
But
yes.
there's this feeling of, if we could just help people to to see that piece, that it's not your fault.
Yes.
These are
Yes.
innocent emotions that are just arising
Mm.
out of the brains that we've got. Ashleigh, what was your first encounter with Michelle's book? I mean, what stood out for you, or resonated maybe with you personally or professionally?
So it's interesting because I had in my head that my first encounter with Michelle's book was before I had my second child. And then when I looked at when it was published and when she was born, so she was born January 2015 and Michelle's book was out in August 2015. I was like,
Ah,
oh, it wasn't at the same time. But I definitely, having sort of being a compassion focused therapist, a lot of the messages already were resonating with me when I became a mother. I've been a mother 15 years now. And my first child, my son, when he was born, I was definitely very much into the kind of striving and pushing towards the ideal. You have to mother in this particular way. And there was a lot of sort of pushing. When I had my second child, I became aware of, how we were living. So my husband and I are far away from our family. We didn't have much of a support network. And I think what the book really says really well, and I'd already had some of the messages, but there's something about the way Michelle has it in this book and how it's really applied to the postnatal, perinatal period. It's just that sense of, the human brain isn't designed for us to care for our babies in this isolated way. We're not
ah,
supposed to be doing this alone. We didn't evolve for this environment where we're living in our houses alone, separate from the extended family. We haven't got any allo parents around us. And it's really, really hard to do this without a tribe, but it's not our fault.
Yeah.
So I think personally that really resonated, and that it was something I was seeing in my clients. As Michelle was talking, I remembered a client I had who was, I think, in her 60s, who'd had twins and really struggled, understandably, because of the amount of, parenting she had to do. But she ended up having like ECT and really not having the sort of support and understanding of she just needs a bit more help, not this kind of intervention. So I think there's that personal lived experience of, God, this is really hard. I really wish we had some people who got it and who were there to help us practically and emotionally. And this is what is happening for so many of our clients. And then the other kind of specific thing that really, like a penny dropped, and I remember reading it in Michelle's book, and it was like, oh, what a relief. So after my daughter was born, I had this terrible, so personally, I was having this terrible nighttime anxiety where I was literally lying in bed in the sort of early hours of the morning with this anxiety, little baby next to me, all the kind of responsibility and protection that you have towards this precious little bundle. And thinking, I'm going to have a heart attack, and having this intrusive thought of I'm going to die. And kind of, as a psychologist, having the awareness of, oh, look at what my brain's doing. And then these kind of old brain, new brain loops happening of, well, if I die, who's going to look after her? And what's going to happen to Doug and Philip? And, but kind of getting it, but not quite getting it. And the kind of real vulnerability of having that anxiety. And I found it really hard to tell anyone what I knew was probably irrational thoughts, but there was a big part of me that was like, well, it might happen. And it was really, really hard to share that. And I think the silver lining when we as psychologists have these kind of experiences is the empathy piece. Kind of like you were saying, Stan, like, what are the limits of our empathy? And it made me think about people that I'd worked with who'd had really extreme anxiety and how that had impacted on them. So that kind of helped me going back to work. but the bit in Michelle's book that was like the aha moment, and I just dipped into it, and I thought I'd read it at the time, but I'm not sure I did. It must have been later when the book came out, and I got the book as soon as it came out, and Michelle signed it for us at a conference and all that kind of thing. But I remember just dipping into the bit about anxiety and reading about how the twilight hours are when human beings, because obviously we were evolved to live thousands of years ago, that is when we are most at risk of predation. So it made absolute sense that in that, there I was lying in bed, twilight hours, with this extreme anxiety, and just having that insight kind of was like, it's the other bit of, oh, it's not my fault, or it makes sense. So yeah, it was a real gift, and it really it was like a bit in the book, and it was only a really little bit in the book, and it was like, oh yeah, I'm not going crazy. There's not something really wrong with me. And I think so, yeah, so the personal experience of motherhood, and I've got 3 children, and we haven't got lots of support, and so there is that sense of, it's understandable to find this really difficult. And the other bit that I thought of when I was thinking about your question was how compassion is really hard, actually, because I did also notice with the birth of my second child and my awareness of, we're not supposed to be doing this alone and this is hard, but actually a lot of sadness came up, that we didn't have the support that we needed. And that piece of compassion focused therapy being like a grief therapy, like allowing those emotions to be there, and for us to sit with them and process them, and I think Michelle's book helps us do that. And listening to Sam's narration of it, there was a bit I was listening to the other day about social comparison and how that makes sense in terms of our evolved social living, but like how as an adult, as a parent of all the children as well, it's just always there, this social comparison of, oh, they look like they're doing loads with their kids. Look at their Facebook posts. God, I'm a terrible mother. And you sort of know you're doing it. But yeah, just that bit of, oh, this is really tricky, isn't it? And it's not our fault. And I think having a book that is specifically around that postnatal period and everything, like Michelle was saying, everything that goes on biologically, so the biopsychosocial model really helps explain what we're experiencing at this point in our life cycle.
It's funny, I've sort of really realized from listening to you there that evolution and the brain is tricky in a couple of ways. One way is that it evolved, and the design is tricky anyway, because we are very concerned about threat, and we have the drive system, and all of this stuff is kind of tricky anyway. But then when you start to think about the way that we have become so distanced from how we evolved and what we evolved to act, the way we evolved to live, not least in groups and tribes, and supporting each other, and that modern life has kind of taken us away from that, and so it's kind of like doubly tricky now. And I remember in the book, early in the book too, it talks about how traditionally, new mums would be also there with mums of slightly older kids, but also grandmothers would be there, and there'd be like, not only at the time of birth, but then in the weeks and months that followed, it would all be kind of part of the group. Whereas now, I think the comment was it's often men now that might be there at the time of birth, and they're only there briefly, and people are moved on out of the hospital again, and it's just it's there's a loneliness there, and a sort of a grief potentially. Michelle, your thoughts there?
So I was just thinking about, just listening to both of you, that when women arrive in the service, I have this sense of it all being very tight, that it's all within me. And just hearing that, just straight away, the how we evolved, and how things would have been at night and the people that would have been around us, that we would have this village. It kind of allows you to breathe right out. There's all of this space. It's like that is the context that we still carry with us now. It might not be how we live, but that is what's still governing our brain. What would it be like if we were living where we were designed to live, where there was somebody awake at night who could protect us? What would that be like? Who's on guard to protect us against predators? What would it be like if your baby is so precious in this group and you're so precious because you've brought a new being into this tiny group, that people are fighting to look after your baby? What would that feel like to have that? Please, can I play with your baby? Please, can I, how can I help you? That what would that be like? That's so completely different, but yet that's the wiring of our brain. It feels like we're living in the wrong way, in a wrong place, and then we blame ourselves for it. And
That
that's
was
the
the
bit
bit.
like,
Yeah, that's
I don't want people to
that's
suffer in this way.
that's exactly what I
Oh,
was thinking. You could imagine a different feeling of worth if you were a
yeah,
part of that village and there were people
yeah,
fighting to look after you because you were so valued as
yes, you're so
a bringer
precious.
of the
Yes,
next generation.
absolutely. You
Yeah.
need to be looked after, nurtured, given the best food. Yeah, absolutely help taught. How do I
Mm,
do this? How do I look after this baby? How do I breastfeed this baby? How you've got people there that are there to help you, to look after you, to take care of you. If you
mm,
do have depression, then you've got all of these other people. It's not just about you. If
mm,
you're struggling in this way, you've got other people that can be looking after your baby while you're recovering, while there are people there to help you recover.
mm.
But we
You're
have this terrible situation where it feels like it's all on one or two people. If there's two of you, two is not enough either. But yet we can kind of fight and go, you've not done your bit. You've spent ages in the toilet all on your own. It's like, that was 15 minutes you spent in the toilet on your own.
15 minutes. That doesn't sound
15,
too long.
yeah.
Um,
No,
Actually, Michelle, you're a great example of how compassion is powerful, isn't it? Because it is
Mm,
about feeling moved by the
yeah.
suffering and just determined to take action. Sam, you're a voice actor, an audiobook narrator, and you've covered many genres. Actually, your website is very entertaining because you have little samples of your work, which is cool. And there's everything from scary stuff to comedy stuff, which is cool. But yeah, what was your first impression of the book when you read it or prepared? I guess more like your personal take, I suppose. Yeah, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I had several aha moments, I would say, with Michelle's book. I learned so much that I never even thought to ask the questions of before. And it made sense not only for, I have two kids, so it made sense for me after looking back at the time of becoming a new mom, being like, that's why I was like that, kind of that whole up in the middle of the night, scared feeling among so many others. But interestingly, it made me see other people in my life differently too, that didn't have anything to do with postnatal stuff, but more just depression and anxiety in general. And just the whole threat system and drive system. And I'd never considered any of that before. I'd never considered how compassion is coming from a place of strength, not just sort of this woolly, soft, like, oh, I
Mm,
feel bad for you, let me give you a hug. It's so much more than that. And certainly self-compassion is really hard, which I hadn't really considered either. And things like just learning the differences between guilt and shame and how some negative emotions feel bad, but they're actually useful. I mean, the whole book was, I mean, I was prepping the book before recording it, and everybody would look at me like, what did you learn now? Because I'd be like this. I mean, it was remarkable. And I feel so grateful that I got to read it, let alone perform it and share it.
Yeah, you make a really great point that the book is focused on the postnatal sort of experience and period, and even sort of depression perhaps and so on. But a lot of the ideas there are really applicable to many things. Sort of, I guess suffering is a part of life, isn't it? And so you sort of noticed that not only did you resonate personally with having your own kids and so on, but just it changes one's perspective a little bit, or the way that we see others in a sense. What were some of the were there any particular passages, for example, or maybe just ideas that stood out for you?
Yeah, there was a lot, like I said, but I think the self-critic was especially, I thought, good. So I recorded Michelle's book live on TikTok. So I had people chatting to me as I was recording it. And there were just moments like when we're doing the exercise about how you speak to yourself and how that feels in your body. And the way you lead people into that is so great, because at first it's just like, just imagine something is happening and feel what that feels like in your body. And imagine somebody bullying you and how that would feel in your body. And then imagine yourself speaking to yourself in that way. And you realize that it feels identical in your body as it did when somebody else was saying it to you. And that I could feel like the people in the chat being like, oh my God, like, yes, you're right, I do. And like, you don't think about it until somebody points it out to you. And you're like, oh, that's right. When I speak to myself that way, and then when I speak to myself in a kind way, I feel just the same as when somebody else is speaking to me in a kind way. There's my dog barking.
It's okay.
So that, I think that was like a really big aha moment for me. And also I could tell for the audience when they were listening as well. It was just, yeah, it was really, it's powerful the way we speak to ourselves. And that, I think, was one of the biggest takeaways for me.
Yes, it is powerful, isn't it? And yet so often we do turn to that self-critical approach with, that harsh tones and the mean statements and things we would actually never say to an actual friend, or expect a friend to say to us. But
No.
it
And I
is
think
like a bullying.
as moms, we can be extra hard on ourselves because our kids are so important to us and it's our biggest job and we don't want to mess this up. So there's this pressure to sort of be perfect so that they can have their most perfect life. And that pressure is immense. I mean, it really is. And Michelle does such a good job of driving home that when we have these overwhelming feelings or when we're not maybe being our best, why it's not our fault. And that helps just take just that little bit of pressure off, which we all need.
Even the self-criticism has a kind of an innocence to it in a way. It's coming from a place of really wanting to do well or do better, or do a good job in this really new and sort of unknown territory of life, and so it's kind of coming from that motivation. It's just that it sort of is misguided in that sense, and perhaps it doesn't actually create the kind of motivational feeling that we really would like it to. Actually, Michelle, Sam sort of alluded there to a couple of the bits of the book. There's I think there's various practices that you offer, and I think I'm just trying to remember, is it 3 phases or stages? I've just sort of slipped which word you used, but just give us a bit of a sense of the structure of the book, actually.
Yes, it was an interesting one, actually, because it started with a very different structure. And it kind of, I'd originally set off with, this is how you explain the compassionate mind approach and all of that. And it was actually, there was a kind of a structure that I felt it ought to have. And it was actually talking it through with Paul Gilbert that we realised that if you were opening this book, what did you want to find? And that was the key thing, that if you're coming with these things, that so often the sense of, does anybody else feel like this? Real kind of deep, powerful stuff that you can be terrified that if I do say this to somebody, that in that moment I might be disconnected. And what we know of this particular time of our lives is we're wired to need even more help than normal. We're wired, the idea of mothers and others, that we need other people around us to help to look after our children. So we're wired to reach out more yet we've got these things that if we say them could disconnect us and we lose that help. So we can end up in a real trap. So it was then thinking about the real hope or intention that when you opened the book, you found yourself in it, and that it starts with dealing with those most difficult and terrifying of things. What if I don't have a rush of love as soon as I've given birth to my baby? What if I feel nothing for my baby? What if I feel anger towards my baby? If I say these things, will my baby get taken away? So just going straight in to address those, so that hopefully people can feel like, no, this is my book. I can come here. It's a kind of a welcoming in, and this is your place. And then as the mind starts to settle and the shame starts to settle, then starting the work of, right, so this is where we're at. These are the struggles. Where now? What do we do about it? And almost a sense of going on a journey. So now we're going to set off, and we're going to go to this place of compassion. We're going to see what it is, what all this is all about, what it does it help? What does it look like? How do I grow it? How do I get from that place to this place quicker and quicker and quicker, so it gets really easy and quick? So learning it, building it. And then the final part is, it's not that you've arrived in compassion and built your compassionate mind, it's then what do you do with it? So the final part is that turning back and now coming back to the struggle, but from this place of strength, of wisdom, of compassion, of warmth, and addressing, like you were saying, the innocent emotions, the self-critic, the anger, the disconnection, the postnatal depression, but from this place. Does it make a difference? This is what the whole book is about.
The first phase is really that, I guess it doesn't do it justice to say, kind of psychoeducation, because I think, as you say in the book, it's actually where things begin, where the treatment begins, and the de-shaming, especially, I suppose you're alluding to there. Then the second phase is some of the compassionate mind training skills type things, I suppose. And again, really great practices that are sort of available there. And then the third bit is bringing those skills and turning towards suffering and putting them into practice. Ashleigh, so where did the idea of turning this into an actual audiobook come from? I suppose the book was published as you said, in 2015, and so what was there a specific moment where you where everyone felt like this was the next step?
Well, I mean, I just felt like it had to be an audiobook, and it was partly personal because I think definitely since having my son, if not before, I listen more than I read with my eyes. So I listen to a lot of books, and like The Compassionate Mind and Mindful Compassion, they were already audiobooks. I'd listened to them. I had long commutes to my work. And then Michelle's book, I just felt like if any book needs to be an audiobook, it needs to be this one, because new mums are busy, they're really busy, and they don't have much time to read. And it felt really important to me that it should be more accessible, because there's so much wisdom in it that I feel new mums, new parents would really benefit from. And for me personally, I mean, I did read the book, but I kind of dipped in and out of it. And actually listening to Sam's narration of the book, it's really nice to hear the whole story. It kind of gives you something different. So I think in terms of the sort of idea, it was just like a no-brainer to me. In terms of the particular moment, so I'm convinced that back in 2015, when the book came out, I emailed the publisher, I emailed Michelle, I emailed the Compassionate Mind Foundation. This needs to be an audiobook. And periodically would kind of go back to the publisher and say, will you make it an audiobook? But I think in terms of costing and money, it wasn't happening. And then I had a supervisee who told me about someone she knew who had bought the rights to his own book and turned it into an audiobook himself. And so that planted a seed. And then on the school run, I met Sam and found out she was a voice actor. And I was like, oh, hang on a minute. Maybe we could just somehow do this ourselves. So it's probably, I mean, it was at least a year ago, wasn't it, that we all got together. It might have been even longer that we started the process. But it was just, you know, Sam and I, our kids go to the same schools, and then she'd tell me what she did. And then she really generously sort of talked us through the process of what we'd need to do. And I was sort of badgering Michelle. Like, this needs to happen, because Michelle is my clinical supervisor and has been for 9 years, I worked out when we looked at the timeline. So it's always been there. And then I think just those little things made me think, okay, maybe this is something we can take into our own hands. Although, you know, it's Michelle and Sam's work. I've just been the connector. So I've been kind of there like a dog with a bone, I think, saying it needs to be an audiobook, it needs to be an audiobook.
Yes.
People need to be able to listen to this.
Yes. No, you've absolutely persisted with it over several years and worn everyone down in a good way,
Yeah.
But I'm sort of suddenly feeling kind of a little bit sort of silly because in some ways it's kind of obvious just how practical that would be for new mums, you know, when you think about it, because reading, it takes a certain kind of mental kind of presence, but it also takes a certain physicality to it, isn't it? You've got to hold the book, or you've got to turn your head, and so it just suddenly,
listening to books. I mean, I literally just have my phone in my back pocket. I'm tidying up, I'm washing the dishes, I'm hanging laundry out, but I'm reading a book at the same time. So it's how I consume a lot of the sort of knowledge through listening to books or podcasts, and you know, so it just, I know that I'm not alone in struggling to pick up an actual book and read it with my eyes. And you know, when you do, you just fall asleep. When you're a new mum, it's just like any moment of. So
no,
it's been a bit of a passion of mine, Stan, to make this more available.
Well done, and thank you for being that dog with a bone, because I listened to it on my walk, so I was able to close my rings on my smartwatch while I was also taking in the wisdom of it all. Sam, voicing a book, which is sort of not something I know very much about, really, but you know, it's obviously much more than just reading the book out loud. You know, it's really trying to hold space and set a tone and create something. You know, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts type situation in a way with that, I think. And you've certainly captured a kind of compassionate tone. I guess that we actually really might try to practice in CFT. You know, when working with people, we're often trying to really think about tone of voice and inner tone of voice and that sort of stuff. What's the process there of you know, approaching a book like this, or you know, can you show us behind the curtains in terms of, you know, like how do you get there with the tone and the delivery and so on?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I mostly do nonfiction work. So I do a lot of fantasy, I do a lot of romance, I do a lot of dystopian, cozy mystery stuff. So fiction. So nonfiction is not my wheelhouse. Nonfiction is not my wheelhouse at all. This is the only one I've ever done, but I hope it's not my last, because I really, really enjoyed it. And with a book like this, I think people assume with nonfiction that you just sort of read it as yourself, but you don't. I was fully in character the entire time I was recording this book as Michelle. Like not as Michelle, but channeling her knowledge. Like, I'm not a psychologist. I don't know that much beyond what is in this book about any of it, but I had to present myself as if I did. And I prepped the book and I sent my first recording to Michelle and Ashleigh. And they were both so nice. Let me just tell you, when they gave me the feedback. I've never had such constructive feedback before. Normally people are like, can you just pitch this person up, or can you just pitch this person down? I'm like, yeah, sure. But these guys were like, I really like what you did here. But I'm wondering, it was like paragraphs, and I loved it. It was so thoughtful and thought through. And one of the things that we came out of it was, because I approached it the way I sort of would with a friend, like very soft, very airy and breathy. And we're like, we need authority, because what we want is, we want the person who's reading it to feel like, I know what I'm talking about. I'm in charge, and they're safe, and they're protected, and it's the information I'm giving them is solid. It's not airy. But at the same time, when we go through the exercises, I wanted the voice to be gentle enough that it wasn't intrusive. They could be with themselves without having me like hammer into their eardrums. So I took the approach of reading it as if I had a PhD in the subject, as if I was Michelle, with how much she really cares and wants to hammer home like key points, like it's not your fault, and this is why we are the way we are, and to create a safe space where all your darkest thoughts are okay, and it's all just normal, it's all just natural. And it took me a while to get into that flow, and actually it took me a while to exit it, because my next book following was a fantasy book, and I had a hard time actually switching out of my nonfiction voice, which I'd grown really accustomed to, into this like high fantasy fairy world.
Right.
Because I can get really wrapped up in the characters that I'm playing, and in this case the character just was a Michelle type person.
Yes.
But yeah, the tone was really important, because it couldn't be dominating, but it couldn't be too soft either. So it just took some time to find that ground, but I think we did. I feel really good about the way it turned out. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting to listen to you describe that. It really is sort of embodying a character in a way, and almost having a backstory to the character, and Michelle being a little bit that backstory for you, and then you're able to really sort of start to channel that and embody it. But it's really interesting that you said that it wasn't necessarily the tone that you first might have guessed, in a way. It was, the first guess was a kind of a softer, gentler tone, and yet the refined kind of version in the end was something that definitely has softness to it, and calmness to it, certainly, but also that sort of sense of authority and kind of strength and sort of safeness, I guess, which then also made me think too that safeness is very multidimensional, isn't it? Safeness does include a sense that those around you might also be there to, back you up, or, sort of in your corner, or have a sense of authority and strength about it as well. That's how we feel safe. Sometimes it's also about, gentleness and cuddles and soft cooing voices, but sometimes it's this more kind of like authority. I've got your back, and you're safe here, no matter what you might be thinking or worrying about or experiencing, or those sorts of things.
And the coaching that Sam says Michelle and I did was very much what we do as CFT therapists, of how to get into your compassionate self. So it was kind of around that, like Michelle described, this is how I do it when I'm doing an exercise. So it was kind of sharing how we approach it, but also how we coach our patients to approach it, to develop their compassionate self.
Yeah, no, it's just really, really fascinating to think about, because we do try to coach the tone and so on, and we also use an acting approach too, don't we? Sometimes in therapy to enact and you're sort of learning about and practicing, but then embodying this compassionate mind or this compassionate self, and so there's an acting quality quite often in amongst the therapy as well. Michelle, what was it like to hear your your words spoken, I guess, aloud by someone else's voice. So did it change the way you experienced your own writing, especially given the time that had passed since the writing and publishing of it? But what was that like for you?
It was a really interesting process. So as Sam said at the beginning, because she was so lovely and so nice, and her voice was kind of this light and airy, and I was like, no, oh no, that's not it, that's not it. But it was so fascinating because it was almost like the sense that often people have of compassion, and I was then like, how do you describe this then to get somebody into this place? And it was like, so how, as Ashleigh said, how do I do it? And that I start with the body and the posture and your feet on the floor, and it was just that sense that the airiness kind of, it lifted it up when you almost floated off, and it was, how do you anchor it? And so it's very much feet on the floor, body upright. So it was describing this process and then imagining the person or the people in front of you, and that's what I did. I did those practices every time I wrote any, even one word of the book. So it was describing that, and Sam just kept coming back, and then it arrived, and it just got closer and closer until there was a moment it was like, that's it. And I could really feel it. And as soon as Sam was saying she's acting that part, but it wasn't entirely true, because the reason why Sam felt like the right person was because of her commitment, her motivation, her compassion, her wish to disseminate this out as well. So that was what was behind all of this. So our interactions, she became the book, the voice of the book. So when I listened to the whole thing, and I was thinking, I'm never going to have time to listen to this. I don't listen to audiobooks. I never listened to one in my life. This is the first one.
Yeah. Yep.
And it was like being surrounded and immersed in this really compassionate voice. So it was a completely different experience for me. And I listened to the whole book. So like Ashleigh, it's a big book. It was a way of consuming it, but it was like Sam talked about how it was important to kind of whisper it in, that you take yourself out of the equation as the narrator. And that's how it felt in the end. I felt like I was having kind of warm oil poured into me, and it meant that I was receiving a gift of compassion. That's how it felt. So for the first time, because I'm used to delivering it, I'm used to training people, delivering it to others or delivering it to myself. But this felt like this really was receiving compassion from someone else. And it was done in such a way that it kind of got under any of my resistances and filled me up. But it was a really wonderful, I really felt like Sam gave me a gift. So thank you for that.
Oh, that's really nice.
And I can even feel it now as Sam speaks. It's like I feel myself going into it.
And it took a while to definitely decide on Sam, because there was a lot of kind of toing and froing, because obviously Sam was my connection, but Sam from the beginning was like, it doesn't have to be me, I might not be the right fit for the book. We talked a lot about the fact that Sam's American and Michelle obviously isn't.
I'm clearly not.
And we sort of toed and froed. Michelle talked to her her friends and family, and there was a lot of thought, wasn't there? And Michelle was like, could you do it in an English accent? And Sam was like, no, it's going to be too distracting because my English accent is just sort of generic. And then we listened to some of Sam's sort of friends, colleagues who are British, but Michelle kept going back to the warmth. It was the warmth in Sam's voice that really so it wasn't just kind of chance and coincidence. I mean, because I was like, well, it's just by chance really that I met Sam, but it wasn't. A lot of thought and consideration went into Sam being the one who delivered the book.
Mm.
And,
And
and
it's
I think, so my positive spin on it is Sam having an American accent might mean that an American audience might access it more than they would. So, yeah.
The accent itself, obviously I noticed that too when I first clicked play, but there's also I think just an international familiarity with that in many ways
Yeah.
too. So it quickly became, just not anything I noticed. The key, I think, by the sounds of what you're all saying, was just the cultivating of that compassionate mind in the delivery. And I was really intrigued to hear, Michelle, you say that even in the writing of the book, that was part of the process, was to really, activate that part of you to do the writing. But it was also, Sam, you were sort of tapping into something that really is very authentically you. As much as you were sort of imagining Michelle and her authority, you were tapping into something that was also very authentically you. And it's a deeply intentional and all of that warmth, but also safeness from that sense of authority. I mean, Sam, what are your thoughts about, I don't know, almost like your voice potentially representing or symbolizing or just becoming so associated with people's compassionate approach to themselves? Have you thought about that?
No, I haven't. I guess it's so weird because one of the things for narrators is we're really not supposed to interfere really with the process. Like, we know we've done a good job if they don't really think about the person reading it so much as the words themselves. So I'm more of like a conduit than anything else. So I've never really thought about it in that way before, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
My job is just to connect Michelle to the listener. And, if I can create a good tone and make people feel safe and comfortable, that's great. But it's just not about me,
No,
It's just,
no. I see what you mean. Yeah, really sort of separating those bits. It's sort of the ego is left at the door of your little booth there or whatever, and you're very humble about it, and you're wanting to convey the real wealth of ideas and practices in the book. And yet I get the sense that everyone feels like the conduit that you are is a really important thing as well. And there was something very, very, very profound in just getting that sweet spot when it came to the tone and that sort of thing.
Well, the subject is very important, and it was very important to me that this book did get turned into an audiobook, and that is why I was happy for it to not be me, as long as it was someone. Because like Ashleigh said, this book being an audiobook format is so important for that accessibility, and I was willing to do whatever to help get it into mom's ears, because I think it could be so potentially life-changing for so many people. And that's why this is the most important book I think I've ever narrated, just because we've already helped one person. Like when I was recording it live, somebody was like, it was just kismet that I wound up on your live, and she bought the book, and it just one person already, that audiobook has helped, and it's not even out yet. So.
Yeah. No, that's really great. Actually, Michelle, it was basically, I guess, a decade ago that it was published. So has your understanding of these matters shifted in any way since then, or were there changes even made in the text for the audiobook or anything like that?
No, the audiobook is the book, so it's that book narrated. So it's interesting actually, because I've just finished the companion workbook for this book. So it should be out when this podcast goes out. It should be out, and it's but we changed the name of it, and it's called the New Motherhood Workbook. So although it's the workbook to go with this book, that felt really important, and at the time it was important, and I'd argued that this is a book for all mothers. It's not just about postnatal depression. But I was told that it needed to be part of the mental health series, and this would enable it to get published. So I thought, okay, if it gets out there, let's get it out there anyway. So there's something about they did allow me to call this one the New Motherhood Workbook, and I think for me, what grew over the years is the feedback I kept getting from this book was that the first bit, the bit of kind of arriving here, people really wanted to share it out. So a lot of people have been giving these at baby showers and as presents to new mums, but they go and ignore the fact that it says postnatal depression, because giving that at baby shower, it's like, why are you saying I'm going to get postnatal depression? I'm pregnant still. So it's that sense that these struggles that are in there may develop into postnatal depression, but so many women and fathers and parents struggle with so much of all of this, that I think it's that a real kind of emphasis that I wanted to give, is having a space to hear the normal struggles, that this can be what it's like, amazing and incredible and difficult, and as we said, discombobulating. So I guess that was one part. The second part, in terms of compassion, was that it's become clearer and clearer to me over all of the years that I've worked in this particular model, and a very similar way of working before this, is that I always thought that I would be working with people to build compassion from nowhere. But what I found is that there hasn't been one single person where compassion needs building up from nowhere, that it's always there, and that actually the job is to help people to find it, to allow the critic, the threat, the depressed part to kind of step aside and to find the compassionate part that is there, and to help people to learn ways of, so how do you get through to that part quicker and quicker, and then bring that part in. So I think for me it's that real kind of having that emphasis that it's finding the compassionate part rather than creating it. It's always there. And I think working with the baby, the joy of working with the baby is you see it. You have somebody who's saying they're not compassionate at all, and you're witnessing it occurring. So there's something really wonderful about this work of having the baby there as an absolute gift to kind of a fast track into this pre-existing compassionate mind.
It's just such a massive time of one's life, isn't it? I mean, it's such a big transition. So many things change. Like in some ways they unfold over time, and in other ways they come all at once. And it's sort of it's and yet it is also a time that kind of does connect us with compassion, really, and even some of the origins of that evolved motivation, which is to care for our vulnerable young, and so quite often there's that there might be that flow of compassion towards others and towards the baby, and it's bringing, so the compassion is there, it's just widening the circle as well, I suppose, to help mothers and parents and everyone feel able to receive compassion and offer it to themselves a little bit as well. Ashleigh, when you think about...
sorry, I was just going to say,
Yeah.
to add on to what Michelle said there, I have this real clear memory of Michelle supervising me when I was in the trauma service and working with someone who had so much trauma and distress, and her saying, what about that part in him? And just look for it's like embers, find the embers and just blow on them.
Yes.
And that, it really kind of stuck with me, because it's finding that little bit of compassion, that or little bit of steadiness and strength already in someone, to just kind of give it some breath, some air to sort of grow it. So yeah, I just thought I'd share that metaphor, because I use it when I'm supervising people now as well. I nicked it off Michelle.
Beautiful.
Sorry,
beautiful.
go on.
Yeah, no, I was sort of just going to ask, like if you think about listeners of the book and perhaps a new mum who's up at night and there with the baby and holding the baby. And what's one thing that you hope this audiobook might offer her in that moment?
I think the main message is that there's nothing wrong with her, that whatever is arising within her, that arises within us in relation to our baby, you know, we can absolutely make sense of it. That, you know, she's okay, and this is part of an evolved process, and it's really tricky. It's not her fault, and we really can develop sort of kindness and understanding towards ourselves, be forgiving rather than blaming and condemning. So we can develop compassion for us and for our baby. But really, just that sense of there's nothing wrong with you. You know, millions of people have experienced the same things that you have, had the same thoughts, had the same fears, fantasies, whatever.
Yeah.
Just that kind of understandableness that we can make sense of this. It's part of being human. And it sucks. It can really suck. It's
Right.
not your fault. Like you can feel so awful, but it's not something wrong with you. We can make sense of it.
Yeah. Sam, what would
Yeah.
you say is one sort of little takeaway that sort of occurs to you from your kind of relationship with the book and all of the information you probably soaked up along the way?
I'm not sure about one takeaway. I will say what I like about this is we talked about how it's more easily accessible to mothers, but I will say there is still such stigma around admitting you have postnatal depression, which is such a shame because it's actually so much more common than people realize, but people are they don't want to admit it. They don't want to ask for help. And I find that really, really sad. And this book is a way, I think, for people to not have to admit it if they're not feeling it, but they can listen and they can sort of start to get the help that they need. They can realize they're not alone. There's all these exercises in the book. There's over 40 of them that are all available at the end of the book. So they can do all these sort of daily mindfulness exercises, which can really help. And I did them as I was recording, and I could feel just myself like relax. And especially there's ones like the soothing breathing rhythm and finding your safe place, and they just make you feel so good, and you can listen to them again and again and again as often as you want because they're right there. So instead of paying for like a mindfulness app, you can listen to Michelle's audiobook and just go to the bits that you need in that moment. And I think that's so nice and unique, and it just gives people a space that they can return to as often as they need to feel better. So I really love that about this audiobook.
And Michelle, if you could sort of convey or sort of just whisper one thing into the ear of the mother who's perhaps struggling with maybe struggling with postnatal depression, what would it be? What would you offer?
Oh, no. Firstly, I think it's the really feeling for her. So something about that. This is just so sad, and this is so awful, and so disappointing. It can be. This is not what you expected at all. But this is not your fault, and there is a way through it. But that this part of you, when it gets hold of you, cannot see that. And I think that's one of the really key things, is that it is a part of us. It creates a pattern. It allows a particular part to come to the fore, which often allows in the self-critic. But it's that part that says there's no hope, there's no way through this. Or you might have helped all of these other people, but I will be the exception. They will be better off without me. It's a pattern that just does this. That's what naturally arises from that part. So it's helping people to understand that there are other parts, and that there's this really powerful one called compassion. But when you're in that part, it doesn't know it's there. So you need a way of, how do I get to it? So that's what this book is doing, is helping people to find that way of getting there. And the other bit is that you really do need the village. You're wired to need the village. So it is that accept help, even though that part will say that you're not worthy of it. So there's almost a kind of, at the beginning, a blind faith or hope that you need to hold on to, that little part. Just blow on that part, because there is a much more helpful way of being with yourself.
Beautiful, beautifully said. And Michelle, thank you for writing the book. It really has made an enormous contribution over many years now. And Ashleigh, thank you for persisting and getting it into an audiobook form. And Sam, thank you for being that conduit, that medium through which the book can really be felt and experienced, I suppose, by the listener. But thank you all for coming and speaking with me on Compassion in a T-shirt.
Oh, thank you,
Thank
Sam.
you.
Wonderful. All right. Well, before you go, I'll just press